Hello and welcome back to the Hibs Observer with myself, Liam Bryce, joined by Patrick McPartlin to preview Sunday's Scottish Premiership clash against Aberdeen at Pittodrie. Another big game for David Gray's side as they look to build some momentum and a bit of a stop-start domestic campaign so far. So we're going to have a look at that and also a look back on the midweek UEFA Youth League match at Easter Road. A good result for Darren McGregor's young Hibs there, so we'll take a wee look at that as well. Patrick was there to see that. But before we get started, just as always, folks, a word for our sponsor. The Hibs Observer is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. So start your search today. Patrick, how are you getting on?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Not bad at all. Looking forward to a big game on Sunday. The start of a big week, actually, with midweek action to follow, hot on the heels of Sunday's game at Pittodrie. But for now, before we even get to Sunday's game, we'll take a look back Wednesday night there. The Hibs under-19s in action, first round of the UEFA Youth League, a comprehensive 4-0 win in the first leg. They're off to Kosovo for the return next week. You were there to see that. For us, what did you come away thinking?
I think the main takeaway was that it was just good fun. I think that it kind of seems to be the overriding feeling when you watch the youth teams is that it's sort of 11 or 11 plus however many subs. Young guys just having fun playing football and not really having the same kind of pressures that you've got if you're in the first team, that sort of thing. Obviously, it's not like that at all, but that's how it comes across. And I think watching this Hibs team, they've been playing together, sort of up through the age categories really, and you can tell that when you watch them play. It's almost kind of like psychic at times. They know where their teammates are going to be. But we know that it's basically the same team that won the under-18s league last season. They've kept them together for an additional year at under-19 level, and it really looks to be sort of paying dividends. They've started the league campaign this year, just like they finished the last one, just really strongly. I think unbeaten so far after about 4 or 5 games, and goals across the pitch as well. You've got defenders, midfielders, forwards all chipping in. It could have been more than 4 on Wednesday night. I think so. You look at the team from Kosovo, FC2 Koroku, were a lot bigger than some of the Hibs players, but I mean, in the end, it didn't really matter. And I think, it was 1-0 for a long time, and you do start thinking, are Hibs are they going to end up paying for these missed chances? But in the end, there was a bit of a gulf between the teams, and it did show by the time the final whistle went. And I think next Wednesday, the second leg should be it should be fairly straightforward, although, in true kind of football style, it was very much, we're only halfway there, nothing's won yet. Lewis Skelly scored the 4th goal during post-match, and I think he said something like, we could all play really badly, and they could score 4 goals, so you never know. So I'd be surprised, but it is football. Stranger things have happened. But all in all, just a really good, really good sort of fun evening, I suppose. Watching these sort of stars of tomorrow, if we can drop a wee cliche in there, just kind of putting on a wee bit of a show at Easter Road in front of, I think it was 1,400 spectators, which is nice for them to get that experience of playing at Easter Road and playing in front of a much bigger crowd than the vast majority of them will have played in front of so far in their career. So it's like a wee milestone. It's good sort of. It's a good kind of it's good practice for the future, I suppose. Gives them a wee taste of what it's like, gives them something to aim for as well. So I should think they'll be confident going into the second leg and then see where it goes from there. Yeah,
you see a sort of gulf between the two sides. Was that in terms of the sort of technical level? Is this quite a technically impressive young team?
I think I tie it into what I was saying about them having played with each other for so many age categories and so many age groups that they just know how each other plays. And it's that kind of, David Gray will love this, it's that kind of dual position aspect as well, where you've got players who can play, sort of like they can play up front, they can play out wide, they can play further back. Players who can play left wing back, left back, centre half. And I think it's just like having that kind of flexibility. It's just, it feels very effortless. And I think that, there are some. I mean, Hibs started off with Rudy Milotnikov up front, so they've got first team experience there. He's obviously had a good few minutes for the first team, mostly last season. And there's a few players in there who've had kind of loan spells, either at kind of Lowland League level, like last year or this year. So I think it's. It's not to say that Corricu didn't have talented players. There were one or two I think play for sort of like the national team youth side. I forget exactly which ones. I'm not going to try to remember it now and derail the video, but they were certainly looked very impressive. And I think if they'd maybe had like a better team around them, or if they'd had a more rounded team, they certainly could have done a bit more damage. But I think they did compete fairly well. Like they had a spell at the start of the second half where they did threaten a wee bit, couple of shots from distance, which credit to Hibs for limiting them to that rather than letting them get in closer up. And it was maybe one or two sort of stramashes in the box. But I think the stats at the end of the game showed that they hadn't had a single shot on target, which I think tells its own story in terms of how defended and how sort of tough going they found in attack. So I think, speaking to the players beforehand, the kind of message from the coaching staff had been, the players you're coming up against will be a lot more physical than anyone you faced in sort of domestic leagues. And I think that's probably a fair kind of way of putting it. They did look bigger, they looked more physical. But I think Hibs were just a little bit faster, both sort of in movement and in terms of thought process. And I think ultimately that's what made the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, encouraging. Hopefully, a good run into that UEFA Youth League for Hibs. But just on the first team matters because they are quite pressing with a huge game up at Pittodrie to come on Sunday. Hibs obviously got back to winning ways last weekend with a 4-0 win over Livingston at Easter Road. Their second win of the Premiership season, the first since the opening day in August. But I think these games, the likes of away at Pittodrie, Tynecastle, Ibrox, beating Celtic at Easter Road. Last season, these were the kind of games that really propelled Hibs on and on through that season. Like the momentum that was built up by these statement results. I think last season it was a 3-1 win at Pittodrie. That was kind of early December, and then you had the Edinburgh Derby after that, and then I think into February beating Celtic at Easter Road, beating Hearts again at Easter Road, and then so there was all these kind of really morale boosting, confidence boosting, really impressive results and performances, and it just seemed to propel Hibs on and on through all those months of last season. So I think basically what I'm getting at here in terms of trying to restart that process, Sunday's it's a real opportunity.
It is, yeah. And I think when you consider how many seasons Hibs seem to struggle at Pittodrie to then, I can't exactly remember the stats. There might be a kind of interim spell I'm missing, but I think David Gray's taken charge of something like 3 or 4 games at Pittodrie, and I think he's won 3 out of 4, something like that. And I think that's sort of like quite impressive, given that several managers went there and struggled. Hibs have been on the end of some really kind of quite heavy defeats there at times over the years. And I think that David Gray talks a lot about kind of changing history. It's not about making history; it's about changing history. And I quite like that approach. This mentality of we're not making history, but we are changing it. In terms of historically, they've maybe not been as successful at Pittodrie as they maybe should have been, so they set about changing that. Same with facing Celtic and Rangers home and away. You try and improve that. And again, the same with Hearts when you consider the Derby record speaks for itself in terms of how many victories Hearts have to Hibs, and that's again something that David Gray is looking at changing. And when you look at this sort of big picture, I suppose you're quite right to mention last season that they became kind of key games as Hibs kind of mounted this 70-game unbeaten run, this revival, this kind of turn in form that eventually led to them sort of finishing third. And I think that the league is certainly a little bit different this year. It's very, I know we're still kind of fairly early on, but it has been a little bit bonkers so far, just in terms of teams beating other teams and sort of surprise results.
Yeah.
And just everything surrounding Rangers at the moment, everything going on with Celtic, the protests from their supporters, how Falkirk and I suppose Livingston, to maybe a lesser extent, have sort of dealt with top flight life since getting promotion, and Motherwell, the new manager. There's so many kind of different. We talk about subplots. There's so many of them this season, and I think really what Hibs have to look at doing is just kind of focusing on their own thing, which is exactly what the players and the management would say, which is just control the controllables, affect what you can affect. And I think after those 5 draws, it's very easy to look at the kind of first 8 games of the season and say, well, there was only one defeat, and they can say, well, there were only 2 wins as well. There were a few draws that should have been victories. And I think it's trying not to get into a wee habit of, like they did last season, I suppose, at the start of losing goals and or games to maybe not get the reward that their efforts merited. So I think that has to be the next thing for David Gray. We spoke a lot before the Livingston game about whether, because it came after an international break, you say, is it going to be a case of the players are going to be champing at the bit to get back out there? Are they going to be rusty? Are they going to be sort of hitting the ground running type thing? And 4-0 victory could have been more, probably spoke for itself. And I think there's a similar kind of narrative around this game because Aberdeen have just had a pretty nightmare result in Europe on Thursday night. They'll be looking to put things right when they get back to domestic duty, and Hibs will be looking to try and take advantage of that, and also to build on building their result against Livingston and try and get a wee run of their own going. And obviously Aberdeen are 2 games unbeaten in the league as well after a tricky start, the win against Dundee, Pittodrie, and then going away to St Mirren and getting that sort of late winner. So it's a difficult one to look at and say it'll go this way, it'll go that way.
Yeah.
I think both teams probably need a result for very different reasons, and I think that should make it like an intriguing encounter. But I do think we've spoken a lot about Hibs just needing to click a little bit, and I think we saw probably the most complete performance that we've seen from them so far this season, domestically speaking, at least. Last weekend, and I think David Gray would just be very, very happy with a repeat performance. I know he says it's a results business and 3 points is what matters, but if you can get the 3 points and look good while doing it, then you're ticking an awful lot of boxes there. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you're talking there about the league being bonkers, and I think this league generally is, but I think this season especially, it's just when you brought that up there, I was just kind of looking at how it is. I mean, it is a kind of mad situation that Hibs have won 2 of their opening 8 games and they're sitting third in the table. So obviously, 5 draws in there. I think there's something like maybe must be, I mean, I'm not without counting them, wasting time and counting absolutely on them. Looks like something like maybe 5 or 6 teams who have drawn 4 or more of their opening 8 games. So it's always been a league where just stringing a few wins together can be pretty transformative in terms of your outlook. And I think in this case, I mean, it's like, even for Hibs, just putting one win on the board last weekend chucked them straight up into 3rd place. So it's such a kind of, I'm trying to think of another word for bonkers, but I think it is probably the most apt description of where it's at. There's a lot of teams jammed in there. We are starting to get to that point. I know there's another international break, but then after that, I think things sort of settle. And you get like a proper run of league games. And I think just to be able to build some momentum through that, string a few wins together, and you can start to, a pretty healthy looking league position and a pretty healthy outlook going into those, especially those festive fixtures, because you know what it can get like over there. So I think just the importance of this game in terms of trying to be a wee bit of a springboard, because then obviously you look ahead and then it's Rangers coming to Easter Road on Wednesday night. I mean, they haven't had their troubles to seek at all so far this season. You don't really know what you're going to get out of them. I mean, you would have thought something resembling a new manager bounced for them in Europe, but they were beaten pretty comprehensively by Brann. So again, I think just circling back to the importance of this game and trying to kind of really kickstart things for Hibs. And I think if we maybe talk about Aberdeen, because I think it's it's difficult to know really what you're going to get from them because, I mean, like a horror start to the league season. I think it took them 6 or 7 attempts just to score a goal, never mind win a game. And then and then they won 2 in a row. So you maybe start to think, okay, there's a wee bit of an upturn here, especially they got a late winner at St Mirren, which is always good for morale and confidence. And I've said momentum about 50 times already in this stream. But again, for them, they would have been looking at that, but then they're straight back down to earth with a bump. Basically, pretty much getting humiliated 6-0 out in Athens in the Conference League. So, it's obviously Hibs can only prepare on the assumption that this is an Aberdeen team that domestically have turned the corner and are starting to pull things together a wee bit. But I think if you take yourself away from that mindset a wee bit, it's hard to know what kind of team Hibs are going to be facing here. Is it a team that's they're going to be a bit of a backlash from that result, or are they going to be winded by it? It's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is. It is a little bit like this kind of famous Forrest Gump quote, isn't it? It's like a box of chocolates, you don't know what you're going to get, and you could apply that to the league as a whole, to be honest.
Yeah.
But certainly with Aberdeen, I've been sort of quite fascinated by how quickly things have turned from the kind of obvious delight and ecstasy at winning the Scottish Cup last season. Mm-hmm. Obviously a really good result sort of on its own to beat Celtic and to win silverware, but then what that meant for them in Europe, and it should be remembered, I think, that came at the end of like a pretty underwhelming kind of second half to the season. Pretty much from that 3-3 draw with Hibs at Easter Road in, I think it was late November 2024, they just never really seemed to be the same. Mm-hmm. But I think when you look at the transfer business that they did, and who they brought in, and the caliber of who they brought in, and you think, well, fair enough, that looks like good business on paper. And considering the players who were already there, you thought that's a good squad. There's a lot of quality in that squad, and I think there was probably a little bit more focus or emphasis put on the Aberdeen's transfer business rather than maybe some of the other teams, because they had spent quite a lot of money. There was, you look at the sort of caliber of some of the players coming in, where they've come from, bringing players in on loan from Serie A, that kind of stuff. And also, I suppose, probably because, the knives were out for Jimmy Tillin a wee bit last season. And then winning the cup is that kind of, does that sort of mean a reset? And then, as you say, when you see the way they played at the start of the domestic campaign, then it sort of turns very quickly again, and it's that a lot of questions about player selection, who's playing where, why certain players aren't getting a chance. I saw one today, just an Aberdeen fan on social media complaining that they've kind of overplayed Topi Keskinen, who I think, if memory serves, scored the first goal against Hibs in that 3-1 win just before Christmas last year. Sort of Finnish internationalist, very very potent threat to begin with, and then it's just he almost seems to be fatigued more than anything else. And I'm not sure he's had the same sort of impact as he has done. Probably should have got an Aberdeen fan on to talk about this rather than me, to be fair. But I think that it does feel a little bit like there are elements of Hibs last season where you look at it and say, well, on paper the squad's really good. It should be quite well balanced. I'm not 100% sure whether Tillin sort of experimented a wee bit with formation changes. Worked very well for David Gray last season, so you never know. But I feel like things were probably not in that great a place anyway before the Athens result, and I think you can compare sort of bits and pieces here and there who you could be beaten by recently, or how well they're faring, that sort of thing. But it's a difficult result for them. But I think when you consider you look at how it's played in Europe, that last game in particular, that 3-3 draw with Legia Warsaw that ultimately ended their involvement in the Conference League competition. After that, you kind of thought, well, are Hibs going to use this as kind of ammo to sort of really kick on domestically and almost kind of take their anger out on other teams? Or is it going to result in sort of the mother of all hangovers? And they're maybe going to struggle a little bit to reach the same level of intensity, the same kind of level of chaos, I suppose, because the second half at times in Warsaw was quite it did feel a bit like getting every man for himself. When you're playing football at primary school, and it's basically your team gets the ball, and all of you run at the opposition goal, and then you sort of repeat until the bell goes for the end of break time or whatever. And yeah, I think Hibs probably did suffer a bit from a European hangover, and it seemed to last quite a while. And I think that's probably the manner of the exit, how much they put into it, especially the final game against Legia, and just to come back the way they did, and then to concede when they did, to force extra time, and then to obviously go out in extra time as well. Just sort of psychologically must have had like a real sort of like damaging effect on the sort of team morale. So I think we maybe underestimate that a little bit when we looked at how Hibs were playing against I'm trying to think who they play. Dundee United. Who else came after that? I'm really struggling to remember. It's been that sort of season already. We're not even in November.
Do you mean the games immediately after Europe?
Yeah, exactly. Effectively, the games that followed that sort of 3-3 draw, you could sort of see that it had like an impact. It was having a sort of lasting effect.
Yeah.
And I just wonder whether it's obviously a different scenario for Aberdeen because it's the kind of league phase. So they know there are more games to come. So it's whether or not, I suppose, the players kind of draw a line under it and say, well, that was a bit of a European horror show, but if we win on Sunday, then we're 3 games unbeaten. In the league, it probably catapults them up to 4th or something because of how close and how tight the league is. Don't quote me on that because I haven't looked at the table recently, but I suspect I'm probably not far off. And I think it's that sort of you're able to then get back on the horse basically, and I suppose a lot of that is how the players kind of pick themselves up, how Tallene and his staff kind of help pick them up. Do we see a lot of changes to the starting 11? I mean, it's a fairly long flight back from Greece, maybe sort of 3.5, 4 hours, something like that. And on top of that, you've just been beaten 6-0, and you've then trying to sort of get over that and prepare yourself to face a Hibs team who are probably on a bit of a nut because they've had such a kind of comprehensive victory the previous weekend. They've not had a midweek game, and things are sort of heading in the right direction for them. They're sitting 3rd, despite, as you say, only winning 2 games. So it's one of those things where if Aberdeen sort of edge at 1-0, you'd be like, well, not surprising because Scottish football's nuts. And if Hibs win 4-0 or something like that, you think, well, yeah, that's unsurprising because of what Aberdeen have been through. So I don't really think whatever the outcome is, you could look at it and say, well, that's a shock. I just think there's so many different kind of avenues it could go down. I think you need, David Gray needs his players to be at their best. He's got decisions to make as well. We can probably move on to talking about that, but he's got selection issues, I think, or selection headaches, which he tells us repeatedly he quite likes having, but he's certainly got them. And I think it's probably the same for Aberdeen, but probably for different reasons. When you look at who they've got available and who played on Thursday night, and who they're coming up against, they'll know sort of like the threats that Hibs have, and it'll be how do they kind of snuff that out. So that that could force changes as well. So it does feel very much like it's a very unknown quantity at the moment. I really feel it could go sort of one of any possible ways, just based on kind of like the last sort of week or so for both teams. And just, this is one of the reasons we kind of enjoy sport, why we enjoy football. There is that level of unpredictability that you can't tell, like there's no science behind it. You can't look at it and say, well, Aberdeen got beaten 6-0 and had a game on Thursday night, so that'll be an easy Hibs win on Sunday. Football doesn't work like that.
No.
So it's one of those, I think it really is too hard to call. You can make a lot of predictions, say, that involve the word should. Things like, Hibs should go into this with confidence. Aberdeen should be, looking for a sort of response Thursday night, that sort of thing. But we know it doesn't always work like that. So I think it's a boring answer, but I think, it really depends on what versions of both teams turn up. And if it's the sort of bad version of both teams, then we could be in for quite a long 90 minutes.
Yeah, we could be on the telly as well, of course. You talked there about David Gray having selection decisions to make, or as you said, selection headaches. And it's, I think, probably the most obvious one is does Thibaut Clichy keep his place in the team? Because he was given his chance to start against Livingston, scored the opening goal, won the penalty for the second goal, man of the match performance. I know you've got Martin Boyle waiting in the wings, and he's he is someone that David Gray's turned to time and again in big games. But does Clichy have to stay in the team?
I suspect it depends who you ask here. I think that if you asked that to David Gray, I'm not sure whether you'd ask him directly because he doesn't ever really give much away about his squad selection. But I can imagine him saying, not necessarily, just to kind of keep you guessing a wee bit. I've already been playing around with various selections and thinking one of those kind of every now and then, you get to the end of like a long week and your sort of brain starts to go a bit funny. And I looked at it and thought, could he actually play Clichy and Boyle together behind Bowie? And I know what you're thinking, that doesn't leave any attacking kind of options on the bench, but I think it does with Junior Hoylett and Ellie Yuan, who's had like another week's training. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me. Like, if you can choose, then why not just play all three of them?
It's a solution.
I'm not suggesting that this is what should happen. I'm just saying if it did happen, I wouldn't be like entirely surprised, because I do think, certainly it's an approach. I think it's very much a kind of hell for leather approach. I don't think David Gray is quite as gung-ho as playing those three as in a kind of attacking trio suggests. So I don't think he will do that. We know that he really likes Kieran Bowie for what he brings to the team. He's maybe struggled a wee bit in recent weeks to kind of have the impact that he would like to be having. I mean, it's, do Clichy and Boyle both start with Bowie on the bench? Does he stick with Clichy and Bowie? Does he go back to Boyle and Bowie and bring Clichy off the bench? It's nice to have these kind of headaches. It's like I was saying earlier, that Gray likes sort of having, I think what was he saying in one of his interviews, he's saying like 23 players who are all competing for a starting place. And that's like a nice position to be in, especially when you consider the fact that it's not just kind of like 11 players and however many subs. It's, just to borrow one of Gray's favourite quotes, the 11 players who start the game are never the 11 that finish. And he's right. It is sort of very much into that kind of rugby kind of finisher sense now. And I think you can see that in certain games. I'm not going to go as far as to say as it's planned substitutions, but you can see when Hibs are bringing players on at a certain point in a game. Last week's a perfect example. Bringing on Junior Hoylett, he gets 2 goals in, I think, the space of 10 minutes. And, all of a sudden Hibs have got, a big win rather than just a kind of fairly straightforward win. So it's, an example of like a substitute impacting a game. So we know that Gray likes that. We know he likes to have his options on the bench. He likes to be able to change it up a wee bit. He also likes to be able to change it up without making substitutions, hence the whole dual position thing. But I think it's not just up front. It's also, in midfield, you've got Miguel Chaiwa, who I think is probably going to be fit after coming off the bench against Livingston. You've got Dylan Levitt in there. You've got Dan Berlasser. You've got Josh Mulligan. I know there's sort of chat about Joe Newell coming back. I would be very, very surprised to see him in the squad, never mind playing. So I think probably discount him at the moment. You've also got Jamie McGrath in there. Do you play him a bit deeper? Do you play him as a 10 on his own? Do you play him as one of sort of 2 attacking midfielders? There's so much to choose from, like Nicky Cadden or Jordan Abita on the left. And then, centre back, do you keep the same back 3 in? Do you sort of bring Rocky Bashiri back in? What do you do? So it's, the logic would be you don't change a winning team, but I think in this day and age in football, you go with whichever team you think is likely to get you a result. And I think the interesting thing is that the last time Hibs went to Aberdeen, I think they probably knew that a draw was enough. I think that in the kind of context between their kind of 18th game unbeaten would have taken them a point closer to where they want to be by the end of the season. So you can understand them sort of thinking, we're not going to do anything risky. We're in a really good position, sitting in third, and if we can consolidate, if we don't do anything daft, we don't take risks. Hibs are not. I think that's one of the things. Just talking about the second half in Warsaw again, that was that was probably a time where, and maybe the second half against Dundee United as well, where, Hibs do have this ability to kind of go for it. And Gray does have the kind of wherewithal to say, right, we are going to just kind of chuck everything at it. And I think it's knowing when to do that, like when it's going to work or when it could work, when it's the kind of time to take the risk. And I think Sunday's game is an interesting one because there is like a wee bit of an element of a risk. Like if he does go for it and Aberdeen are kind of trying to roar back domestically and put Thursday night behind them, then, it could backfire. But at the same time, we've seen Hibs start games very strongly and not kind of capitalise on it. Last weekend, we saw Thibaut Clichy score after, I think, 9 minutes, which turned out to be, I think, the earliest goal that's been scored across the Scottish Premiership season as a whole so far, which is just, I called it bonkers earlier. Like, it's, the evidence is mounting up here. Hat tip to Scotland's coefficient for pointing that one out, I think. I haven't had the time myself to sit down and research all of that. So I think it's, there's a lot, again, it's not just like selection, it's also how you play the game. Do you kind of go into it and kind of feel Aberdeen out and just see, are they going to be kind of wounded beast? Are they going to be, back to domestic kind of form? And then, of course, it's, do you actually just ignore that and you play the way that you want to play and then kind of ask questions later? And I think if Hibs start the same way they did last weekend, if they, move the ball about like they did, to sort of play with that little bit of swagger, then, that should, again, there's that word, that should be enough. And I think above all for David Gray, obviously the 3 points is the most important thing, but I just think some consistency as well. Consistency in performance, consistency in results, consistency that isn't sort of 5 consecutive draws, obviously. But, they are in a really good position in the table. They can't really control what else goes on around them. They can't influence other results, but they can obviously give themselves the best possible opportunity of finishing as high up the table as they can. And to do that, they need to win games. And to win games, they just need to, essentially play like they did last weekend. And, for Gray, he needs to get it right in terms of team selection, subs. And, I think you forget sometimes that it is only his second full season as a head coach in his own right. So there are going to be mistakes. There are going to be, sort of learning curves and stuff like that. But I think we maybe saw last weekend there were, subs were made at good times. They impacted the game. The starting 11 was very good. So, I'm quite intrigued to see what he does on Sunday because I think he does have a lot of options, and not just do I go with this 11 and these guys on the bench, but just like how do I play? Do I play a kind of 3-4-2-1? Do I play this 3-4-1-2? Do I go more defensive on the left flank and bring John Nabita back, or do I keep Nicky Cadden in there because he'd love to goal against Aberdeen? So it's I imagine it's probably been quite difficult for Gray to kind of pick an 11 because there's so many players who could feasibly play and sort of do what he wants them to do and really kind of push Aberdeen. And I suppose the ones that don't start, you're going to get them coming off the bench doing that. So it is a nice position to be in, but also very difficult to sit here and say, he's obviously going to pick the same team because it's a winning 11. I don't think it's going to be that straightforward at all.
No, I don't think so. But certainly an intriguing one, really intriguing. Just everything around this game. And I think we could be in. I think it's got. Famous last words here, but I had forgot slightly about that, about the last time Hibs went up to Pittodrie, and that was not a good game of football. So I'm hoping for, in terms of entertainment value, surely we're going to get an upgrade on that this Sunday.
Or you've jinxed it.
Or I'm jinxed it, yes. But if it turns out to be another stinker, then you can direct those complaints my way. And I think that's absolutely fair enough. But for now, folks, I think we're going to leave it there. We'll be through at Pittodrie on Sunday for coverage of the game. More kind of build up into that over the next 24 hours heading into the game as well. So do keep an eye on the Hibs Observer website. Just before we go, just a wee plug for, we're currently running a competition to win 2 tickets to the upcoming home game against Dundee on November 22nd. Patrick, have I got my dates right there?
Yeah, I've got your dates right there. Yep, can confirm.
So yeah, that's open to new and existing subscribers to the Hibs Observer. So if you don't currently subscribe, it's £1 for 6 months, and you can find the details on hibsobserver.co.uk. And if you are an existing subscriber, if you go to hibsobserver.co.uk as well, /competitions, you'll be able to find details how to get yourself involved in that. So yeah, well worth checking out, folks. As I said, it's just £1 for 6 months, gets you access to all our content on there, full coverage included of this Sunday's game against Aberdeen, which we hope will be a cracker and another 3 points on the board for Hibs in the Scottish Premiership. But for now, we're going to leave it there. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll speak to you again very soon. Cheers.